We have a press release that was sent out by Sir Ronald Sanders, Ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda to the U.S. and the OAS. And the ambassador is writing about a new legislative effort by several Republican senators to actually impose financial and other sanctions on any country which requests medical assistance from Cuban doctors. So if we go to screen right now, you could actually see I've pulled up the press release on the screen. Let's see if I can get that properly centered for you. And the title is Caribbean Among Countries Unfairly Targeted by U.S. Senators Over Cuba. Now, if you have a look, you can see that three Republican senators from Florida, or two from Florida, Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, as well as Ted Cruz from Texas, have actually introduced a bill to the U.S. Senate called Cut Profits to the Cuban Regime Act, which would actually seek to penalize any government across the world that would contract with the Cuban government for the provision of medical personnel. Now, several of the countries in the Caribbean, including those of the OECS, have such contracts with Cuba, and such we are all subject to be targeted if this legislation makes its way through the Senate and the House and is signed into law by President Trump. The bill seeks to impose that a list of those countries contracting with Cuba for the provision of medical services is published by the U.S. State Department, and that these contracts be considered as a factor in considering the country's ranking for the annual Trafficking in Persons report. So obviously this article by Sir Ronald goes on to heavily criticize this decision, and it actually makes representation that the U.S. is seeking to interfere in countries' sovereign decisions in terms of their contracts with Cuba, another sovereign nation, and is just sending out the alert to the OECS territories and the citizens of those OECS territories that this is something in terms of a danger that the countries face. Now, a few minutes ago, I was able to squeeze myself into the very, very busy schedule of OECS Director General Dr. Didicus Jules, and we had a conversation about this development and what that could mean for our OECS state. So let's take a listen. This is my interview, again, that was recorded less than an hour ago with Dr. Didicus Jules, Director General of the OECS. And joining me right now is the Director General of the OECS, Mr. Didicus Jules. Dr. Didicus Jules. Dr. Jules, how are you doing this afternoon?
Doing fine, thank you.
I wanted to just get your perspective on this piece of information that we have three U.S. Lawmakers actually putting forward legislation that will punish countries like St. Lucia, like other OECS territories, for seeking help from Cuba in terms of medical assistance. Now, I wanted you to just give us some context about why the OECS has this close relationship with Cuba, especially as it pertains to the medical field. We send scholarship recipients up to be trained. They send us medics to do eye clinics and other projects in the territories. So why is this relationship so important for countries in the OECS?
Well, Janika, let me say first of all that Cuban assistance and collaboration in medicine with the OECS goes back to about 40 years. It first started, as you intimated, with the provision of medical scholarships in 1979 for nationals from several OECS member states. The second milestone in that journey of collaboration was the establishment of something called Operation Milagro, or Operation Miracle in English. This was started as an initiative between President Chavez of Venezuela and President Fidel Castro. That involved providing free surgical operations to restore eyesight to persons suffering from reversible eyesight problems. What happened then was initially you had chartered flights provided by Cuba and Venezuela taking people to clinics in Havana for treatment. and being returned with their eyesight restored. It then evolved to the establishment of clinics in the participating countries that was staffed by Cuban and locally, local Cuban trained experts. Since the program started to August of this year, 23,000 persons in the OECS have had their eyesight restored. The third phase of collaboration was, which was a much deeper level of cooperation, started in 2014, 2016 with the Ebola epidemic in Africa. If you recall that this was a very grave threat because Ebola was, you know, it was totally death threat. It was death. There was no recovery from Ebola. So grave was this threat that the OECS ministers of health, the Council of Health Ministers with their CMOs actually met using video conferencing from 2014 to 2016, almost on a weekly basis to coordinate efforts. Now it's interesting now that we have COVID, the use of video conferencing is the norm. But that, since 2014 and 2016, we have used this mechanism as a medium for health cooperation. Coming out of that collaboration, 50 medical practitioners from the OECS were treated in the management of the disease at the Pedro Curie Institute in Cuba. Then the Cubans also established, on our request, a medical SWAT team in Havana that would be deployed within 12 hours of any Ebola outbreak in any member state. And then the OECS Pharmaceutical Procurement Service, which does engage in central procurement of personal protection equipment and gear and other supplies that were needed to manage a possible outbreak. So fast forward to now with COVID, from the declaration of the pandemic, the OECS health ministers, and this time as well as the heads of government, have worked within an agreed framework for the management of the disease. And Cuban collaboration was key to the health dimension of that framework. So for example, we have Cuban health brigades now deployed in most OECS member states: Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Martinique and Guadeloupe, and also deployed as well in other CARICOM states like Barbados, Jamaica, and Belize. We have actually purchased 9,000 units of a drug called interferon, which was used successfully in China and Italy to assist in the recovery of COVID cases. And this is now being proportionately distributed to all member states on the basis of population size. Internationally, though, there are 34 Cuban brigades comprising nearly 3,000 health professionals deployed in 59 countries worldwide. So this is not unique to the Caribbean alone. It's important for me to reiterate here, Janika, that the OECS welcomes and appreciates the assistance provided by all countries, let me emphasize, all countries who extend a hand of solidarity and support to us. You saw the thousands of St. Lucians and other OECS citizens who flocked to the U.S. Naval Hospital ship Comfort in October 2019 to receive wide-ranging free medical assistance. That is testimony to the scale and the importance of the need for state-of-the-art medical assistance in the OECS. Now, the 3 Republican senators who have proposed these harsh punitive measures on countries accepting vitally needed medical assistance from Cuba would better serve the interests of the U.S. with proposals to assist our countries in the fight against COVID-19. You cannot threaten me for accepting a lifeline, a life jacket thrown to me by a friend when I'm drowning, but not replace it with an alternative lifeline. You can't threaten me, because these threats are very serious. They're talking about financial blacklisting and literally a financial choke-off of the
that's
OECS.
what I wanted that's what I wanted to ask you, Dr. Jules, in terms of the risk, the threats. What impact or what ramifications could those have for the OECS economies if this bill goes through, or if it gains
The,
traction
the
in Congress?
ramifications are dire and deep because you're talking about financial blacklisting. We, as you know, we fought a continuous battle in the last 5 years in particular about financial blacklisting, having to do with the European Union and the efforts on that front. And the irony of this thing, this world is a very unfair world because there are countries worldwide. I don't know if you recall some time ago, Saudi Arabia was listed by the EU as blacklisted for money laundering, as an area for money laundering. And within 2 days, they were taken off the blacklist. So, it's a very unequal world. And I think it is totally unfair of these Republican senators to try to impose these exceedingly punitive measures in countries that are accepting desperately needed medical assistance from someone who is not just part of the Caribbean family, but who also has a history going back of 40 years of consistent assistance and support in the area of health, among other areas. What we have to be clear on is that this pandemic has no political or ideological complexion, and no country, no matter how rich or poor, whether powerful or powerless, can fight this on their own. In fact, I'm reminded of the words of the Guyanese poet Martin Carter, who said that all are involved and all are consumed. And the sooner we get that message and work globally, regionally, and locally together, we are doomed.
What I want to find out from you now, Dr. Jules, is what is the OECS doing to respond? Do we have any diplomatic efforts that are already activated in terms of lobbying against this proposed legislation? Talk to me a bit about that.
As we speak, the OECS member states are issuing instructions to their ambassadors to seek to meet with. In fact, these three senators have a long-standing history of trying to push the anti-Cuba agenda. And in fact, efforts have been made in the past by our diplomats in Washington to meet with them, to have a dialogue. And they've always been pushed to lower level aids. So now we are making a concerted effort to meet with them, to have a discussion, to explain the situation and the context of the OECS so that we do not become pawns in a battle that we didn't start.
Well, thank you very much for your time today and the insight. I know that this is something that is very concerning to you and your team at the OECS, and definitely we here at the Choice News Desk will be keeping an eye on those developments, because I know that, as you said, we have a long history in terms of medical support from Cuba. We have an ongoing relationship with Cuba, so it would be very unfortunate if we were to be penalized for that. Thank you very much, Dr. Jules. We'll speak again very soon.
You're very welcome.